scene of it is that people in a horror movie don't know they're in a horror movie. To them, they are making rational decisions. And you sitting in the audience, you're like, of course, don't go into the basement. That's where the vampire is. They don't know that.
Everybody's saying the same thing right now. When AI can do the work, the thing that will still matter about people is taste. It's going to be judgment and discernment. Fine. I buy that. But where does taste come from? It's not a personality trait. You're born with it or you're not. I think taste is built, and I'm looking to find out how that taste is built. So that's what this series is. I'm sitting down with people who clearly have it and digging into where theirs comes from. First up is David Monk. He was at Microsoft for 12 years, 4 at Apple, and he's thought harder about software quality than just about anybody I've spoken to. And the first thing out of his mouth when I asked him about this was, MVP is ruining everything. So let's start there.
Just to sort of, pick some fights with people.
I think that's a great place to start. You said you know why people reach for the MVP. So let's make the case for it first. Why is it rational? Why do smart people do it?
The members of the audience who aren't familiar with MVP, let me give you a bit of background. So in a agile software development shop, you will be striving for a minimal viable product at each step along the way of development. And what this means is like, don't try and build a car all at once. Have something that is usable for transportation each step of the way. So like it could start as a skateboard and then become a bicycle and then become a four-wheeler and then become a car. And then you have your car. And when I say that MVP is ruining everything, it is typically shops that view it as a destination and not a waypoint toward the destination. So company will say, okay, we've got to get the MVP. We've got the MVP and we've got to ship fast. We've got to get it to market. Okay, here you go, world. Here's a product. And then instead of refining it and making it into a higher quality piece of software, they move on to the next thing. And what you end up with is a sequence of minimum viable products which never reach their full potential. I don't think this is necessarily a problem with Agile itself. When I was at Microsoft, we were very definitely not using Agile. We were using a system called Waterfall, where it was sort of like multi-year process, because we didn't really have the online distribution mechanisms that we sort of take for granted today. But with the Agile environment, the idea is like, people can download updates all the time. We can get rapid response to customer issues. But the problem is if you don't iterate on your idea and consistently improve it, you're just going to end up with a bunch of half-baked software everywhere. And I feel this because I encounter it so frequently in my daily experience. Like I come home from work, I turn on the video game console and I get some like weird esoteric errors. There's no one to call. There's no, support that can really help me out in this situation. It's just sort of like, oh, don't worry about the rough edges because we'll get it in the next patch. But the perception of the software quality is not as high as it could be. The other way I'm viewing software is, and this is going to sound kind of strange, so stay with me, cheese. So I'm a sucker. If I see something labeled artisanal cheese, I'm like, oh man, that's going to be some good cheese. And I feel the same way about software. What I'd like us to get to is a point where we have artisanal software, where we have focused time and effort on increasing the quality of that software to the point where it's not just usable or you don't really notice it, but you actually enjoy using the software. I'm not sure if there's software that you've had exposure to that meets any of these categories, but I'm interested to get your take on it as well.
Anything I've ever built. I've always felt that there's this tension between the way I want to do it as, I'm going to steal your word, artisan, and making sure that my paychecks cash when
Mhm.
when it's payday. And I understand as QA, your job is to make sure that the software we're shipping is actually working and you're not getting those esoteric errors. How do you balance that?
It's practice, practice, practice. I had a mentor at Microsoft who would say the best part of testing software is when they let you stop, because there is always gonna be one more bug, there's always gonna be one more test case, and what you have to do is find a balance point, because otherwise you'll never ship. Like, you can you tend to continuously polish and clean it and keep polishing it and clean it, and you never stop, and it never gets released, and then the company goes away, and that's not what I'm advocating for. Like, I've gotten a response to my views on minimal viable product as, "That's a little idealistic," and it's like, I don't want us to go too far the other way, but what I'm saying is, like, don't don't stop at the MVP, but sort of use it as a waypoint or a rest area on the highway of software development.
So it does more harm than good because it's partially built. Like you put up the studs, but you haven't put up the drywall, or you put up studs, but it's not properly nailed in.
I think that's a really great way to put it. Or there was a time for, I'll give a metaphor. It may help here. So my wife and I were looking at houses, and we went to a new development, and nothing felt high quality. Like, the banisters wobbled, the the lines were not quite straight. The If you looked at the front of a house, it wasn't symmetrical. It was, all these little things, and it's sort of like, if you take it as, is this a house? Can this provide the basic tenets of what a house is and what we expect from a house? And the answer is yeah. It's a perfectly fine house. It'll shelter you from the elements. But will all these small little annoyances detract from your experience and make you kind of resent the house? And that's what I'm seeing in a lot of agile developed software, where it's sort of like they never really took the time to polish, because, and this is going to sound strange to people like these days, but software used to come in boxes. And on the back of the box, you'd have these bullet points of sort of like, oh, these are the new features in this version of the software. And it's sort of the same thing with these agile releases, where you want to have bullet points for new development that really grab the user, make them want to update. And it's hard to make, hey, we fixed some bugs. It's hard to make that sound really appealing to the people who might be using the software. But it's my goal is to sort of get people to approach it like I approach cheese, where you're sort of like, ooh, this has the features I need, but like the emphasis has been placed on the software quality itself. And so I'm putting what I believe in into practice right now. I am working on a project with a friend, Rachel Neighbors, called Mima, which works as a social media aggregator and cleaning out the bad stuff in social media. And one of the tactics I've used is rigorously and continuously attacking the code base. Like, how can we tune this up? How can we make this more performant? And I'm using a technique I call agentic testing, where I'm using an LLM to help do the code analysis. I'm also testing it by hand. I'm also looking at the deltas. And Rachel is focusing on the new functionality going in, but we're building it on a solid base that is as reliable and as high quality as we can get it. We're not building on top of sand. It's sort of like the old Simpsons joke, like, we built this castle in the swamp, and then it sank, and so we built another castle on top of it, and that sank. Instead, we're looking to have a solid foundation that we can keep building on top of.
When we spoke earlier, you said you don't need to outrun the bear, just the other guy. So
I knew I was gonna catch some flack for that
I'm not giving you flack. I just want you
one.
to speak to
Well,
it. Is
a
so
lot of
is
people give me a hard
MVP
time.
just
So the full story is sort of like, if you're out camping with a friend and a bear starts chasing you, if you're if you're a very selfish person, you can like trip up your friend and then the bear will eat your friend and you can run off to safety. And this has come up in some of my work in security where it's sort of like you don't need to be perfect in terms of security. You just need to be a harder target than other people in the same space. And some people get quite upset about this, and they're like, "No, you should try and get everyone to be able to outrun the bear." And where this comes into software quality is sort of like you don't. There's a take that you don't need to have perfect software. You just need to have software that's not the absolute worst. You are 1% better than your competition. But in my mind, that's falling into the same MVP trap where you could be doing more. And I actually experienced this firsthand because I went straight from an agile focused startup to Apple. And the way that you approach software testing there has to change with it because in the agile shop it was okay, we got, you know, adequate coverage, good enough. We got to keep moving. We can't hold up for release for, additional test creation. And then Apple had a very different approach to software quality in that it's incredibly customer focused. They want to have their features as polished as possible and really think about it from all angles. And so it was wonderful in that respect. And you have really intelligent people coming to you with different test ideas. And so the problem there becomes time. Because someone will be like, "Hey, I have this great idea for test cases." And part of me was like, "Yay." And part of me was like, "No." Because you're still trying to fit it in the timeline. But I would like to see customers demanding more in terms of software quality. There has been a lot of pushback at Microsoft Windows recently, and I had to install it for a project. And so I worked on Windows XP back in the day, and so it is very close to my heart. Windows XP, Windows 7, even Windows Vista, like I'm very fond of, and it's sort of like my children. And then I installed Windows 11, and there are like ads everywhere. Search doesn't work. I can't find things. What have you done to my boy? And there was a lot of pushback from the customer space, and they said to Microsoft, "Look, you're focusing on putting AI in everything. What if you focused on like making search work, making the UI responsive, making printers actually print?" And initially, Microsoft did a really great response to that, and I was like, "Yes, we will do that." I haven't really seen a ton of results from that. I might be wrong. They might be doing a great job, and they just haven't really trumpeted it a lot. But I do feel that customers have a lot more power than they might realize, and they can demand and affect change in the industry.
To go back to the MVP outrunning the other guy part of that question, if you're constantly just trying to do a little bit better than the other guy, what does that do to your discernment and taste over your career?
Uh, it turns it into a very frustrating experience because you're looking for, or at least I am looking for great software. And I can think of some examples, like the one that always comes to mind was BB Edit, which I was first exposed as a text editor. It's great for simple scripting. I started using it in 1995, 1996, fell in love with it. And when I got my first job in industry, one of the first things I did was I bought the software because it was like free to use, or you can pay extra for pro version. And I left him a little note and I said, "I've been using your software since 1996. This is the first time I can pay the license, but I really appreciate the high quality of it." NetBeans was another really high quality polished piece of software. And like using those, it's even beyond you don't notice it because like some software you don't really notice it and that's fine. Like, it's perfectly adequate. It doesn't make me angry. But I would love it if we could get to a point where more software in our everyday use is a joy to use. Apple has a concept called surprise and delight. And the the cynical flip side of this is we don't tell people enough about what we're doing. Like there are features I discover in my Apple devices that I did not know that Apple shipped, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, they should be telling everyone about this." The one I always mention is, Apple phones have, an ability to turn on these moving dots that reduce or eliminate motion sickness when you're in a vehicle. I had no idea about this. Someone just casually mentioned it because I was like, "Oh, hey, what are those dots on your sc" "Oh, you should try this." I used to get
As somebody who gets car sick, it's the greatest feature.
it's the greatest feature ever. Why aren't they telling everyone about this? And so, like, I call that, software as a joy to use. The software we're using to record this this podcast, I would call more sort of like I don't really notice it. It's not it's not incredibly great, but it's also not annoying me, so it's fine. But let's all raise the bar a little bit to get past the low standard that seems to have emerged from this race to the bottom. A great example I use is like you buy a new television. It comes with a whole bunch of UI that you really don't want there. You have no interest in. You can't turn it off. Now you have ads in it. Sometimes the UI doesn't work. Sometimes you'll do a system update, and this actually happened to me last night. They turned on features that I'd pay for, and it was like, could we do better? What if we had television software that actually brought about joy when you used it? And you're like, yes, this is exactly what I'm looking for. It's targeted at customer joy rather than targeted at increasing advertiser revenue. And I'm aware that, companies have to pay the bills, and like this is how Facebook is free is via ads. But it's a state of mind where if we start from the initial idea of let's make artisanal software, like I would love to see what comes out of that. That would be really fascinating.
And you've called it, I think when we spoke, you called it the daily bug show. The alarm's broken, the stereo's broken, your TV's broken. Oh my God, I hate those the ads too. The game won't launch. What was the first time you decided you couldn't not see that thing that everybody else ignores, or a lot of people ignore?
For me, there were 2 bugs that really sort of energized me in this. One was that I didn't know that the volume slider on a iPhone controlled the alarm clock volume. And so my alarm clock was happily going off for hours, but the volume was muted. So I had absolutely no idea. Slept through like 3 meetings. So I found that quite frustrating. And then the other one was a lot more niche. There's a game I play a lot, Civilization 5. And if you conquer a city in a certain way, it will crash the game on Mac 100% of the time. And I got really passionate about this because like it's a full stop. You lose your progress. You're just gone. And I was like, and it would be a rare enough condition that I could completely forget about it in between games. And then I come back to it and I'd be like, oh, crap, lost all my progress. And so I wrote this incredibly detailed bug report, logs, snapshots, memory utilization, videos, all this stuff, boxed it up, sent it to the game publisher. And they were like, thank you for your report. Are you aware that game is like 10 to 12 years old at this point? They were like, we have newer versions of the game. We have Civilization 6 and Civilization 7. Maybe you'd like to try those. And so I think those two for me were very motivating. Trying to just sit down at the end of the day and play video games is for me quite often an exercise in frustration. It's like last night I sat down to play Destiny 2 and it had like 25 gigs of updates waiting for me. And it's like I don't have that much time to play games. I have like, 2 hours a day max. And if like half an hour is eaten up by downloading software updates,
It's frustrating.
I'm not going to think of playing the games as fun. I'm going to think of it as kind of a chore. It's sort of like there are certain appliances in my house where like the main thing I use them for is to update their firmware, and it's like this doesn't make sense. I don't want to be a sysadmin in my own house. I want to just be able to use it and have it take care of itself.
When you were at Microsoft, you said nobody else walked across the hall to talk to the Vista developers and designers, but you did.
So the
And they gave you a jacket because nobody else had ever spoken to them.
so this
What
it
was
was
it that
actually
made you go? Where did that come from?
so this was largely interaction between the testing team and the design team. The interactions between testing and development I thought were excellent. I thought the interactions between development and design could have been a little bit better, but we're still pretty good. But the interactions between QA and design were non-existent, and I knew where they all sat, and I knew who they were because they were all cooler than us. Like the engineering part of the hallway, it was mostly like black heavy metal t-shirts and and scruffy sneakers, and then designer side, everyone was dressed more fashionably. And I just went out and I said, "Hey, I'm from QA. Would you be interested in me giving you feedback on the designs from a QA standpoint and like what bugs it could cause?" And they were completely agreeable to this. They were like, "Yeah, come on in." And so we were able to stop bugs before they were even implemented in design. Like not just stop bugs before they were implemented in code, but stop them before the design was implemented. So like for example, a window border would be too thin and the text would not render in it. Or there was transparency on part of an object. And I said, well, what happens if the text is white and the text would just disappear? And we were able to prevent so many issues and spend more time focusing on fixing existing bugs, fixing functionality, and not having to worry about issues that were introduced as part of design. And we did this for a number of years and it was incredibly rewarding. And, you know, I loved it, and I learned a ton about design and the process of design. And at the end, they made these cool little jackets that said, MSX design team, and they were like, "We got you one." Yay! Because it
Well, I
is
imagine that I imagine that saves a lot of money because it like the cost increases exponentially the closer towards release and after it gets. Like I think a bug that costs $1 to fix in the paper planning stage, it costs something like $10,000 to fix once it's been released. So
100%. It was saving money, and we were able to provide that as part of the justification. We were like, "Look," we even showed the curves. There's like a very famous graph in software testing where, it shows the cost at every step of the product development. We're like, "This could be really bad if we tried to fix it after we shipped." But we're doing it before it even exists. And, like, you can take it even one step further, and with teams that involve QA in the planning stages, in the dreaming stages where you're just sort of sketching out ideas. And it's important not to just have QA shooting down ideas, but sort of like approach it almost like improv comedy where you're like, "Yes, and," "Yes, and this needs to be accessible. Yes, and if we do a design this way, we can make it more readable for a larger portion of the population."
I think the crux of this series and what I'm trying to answer might get answered in this next question. So I feel like it's an important point. You said the most important thing a mentor did for you was to point out the downside of your own actions. And without it, you wouldn't have known it was a mistake. Can you t- talk me about a specific time that happened?
Sure. The best summary I've seen of it is that people in a horror movie don't know they're in a horror movie. To them, they are making rational decisions, and you sitting in the audience, you're like, of course, don't go into the basement. That's where the vampire is. They don't know that, and so there was a time where a small team I was on didn't really have any management oversight, and we were just doing the best we could. And it turned out later we were making a lot of really bad decisions that were not aligned with upper management, that were not taking us in the right direction, and were actually sort of kneecapping ourselves. And when we finally got some management oversight, he said to us, "Look, You thought you were doing the right thing at the time. I totally understand that. Let's make some corrections. Let's make sure that we are aligned with the team objectives. Let's improve the perception of our team." And he laid out these really straightforward steps on how we can improve ourselves. This was, my manager, David Lopez. I loved working with him because he would be able to calm us down. He would say, "Look, you're right. I ideally, you are absolutely correct, but the perception matters. The the intangibles in the inter team communication matter, and you need to spend time working on that. It's not enough to just sort of say, 'Well, I'm right, and that should be enough to win the argument. I'm technically correct.' Well, sure, maybe, but you need to convince the other parties to, like, compromise, work together, achieve a balance of inputs to get where you wanna be."
I mean, that sounds like developing emotional intelligence and working with people.
Exactly, and I've had experiences where I was given a choice between working with, a 10x, 100x engineer or working with junior devs, and I would rather work with junior devs who have better communication abilities, better senses of empathy or emotional intelligence than technical excellence. I've seen some interviews with, I won't name names, but like some of the big names in computer science, and it was a very flattering interview. But you could still see the subject getting very frustrated that he had to waste the time talking to this reporter, and it was just sort of like, "Come on, man, this isn't praise of you. You should be enjoying this." And so I wish that it worries me that universities have sort of become more of a trade school for computer science, and what you should really be learning is how to think, how to communicate, and how to be able to convince other people with your ideas. And I think if we can achieve that better, then I think that'll really help us provide high quality software more easily. But communication is the key. Some of the companies I've helped out through consulting, like, one of the first things I say is like, stop siloing, stop saying they did it. It was their fault. There is no more they. It is we. It is us. We're all in this together.
You've got people you're mentoring now. What's the thing you have to keep showing them that they can't see in themselves yet?
A lot of them will stop themselves before the actual challenge. Almost everyone I've interviewed or everyone I've mentored, when they're about to start interviewing for jobs, they're like, "Oh, I don't know if I should apply for this. I don't know if I'm good enough for this one." And what I tell them is channel your inner tech bro. Like, pretend you are a guy named Chad. You have Oakleys, you have a popped collar, you're wearing khakis. Don't completely become that person, but think about how they would handle the situation. And Chet would not hesitate in applying for a job. He would feel confident enough that he would go for it, even if there were some spots in the job posting he didn't completely have. He would go for it. And I've had people come back to me and they say, I did an interview and I channeled my inner Chet and I got the position, which is kind of alarming. But I feel a lot of people in tech, especially in the junior stages, will surrender the battle before they fight it. And a lot of them, I will just tell them, you are smarter than you think you are. You know things that you don't know that you know. And you can come into this situation, and if you can keep a cool head and remember that you're smart and can solve hard problems, you're likely to go further than you think you would.
Younger you, the younger version of you, David, what argued in town halls.
Lordy.
Now older you raise it more quietly and you tend to approach it with a better, no, with a different bedside manner. I don't forget
I
I
I
said better in
approach it
there.
I approach it with tact now.
Tact, that's the word.
When I was younger, I was very idealistic, and I would raise difficult questions in town halls in front of important people, and that was a mistake on 2 parts. One was that I'm not gonna get the answer I'm looking for in that environment. Executives are not gonna say anything that they can be held to, in a public record. They are gonna dance around the issue very carefully. And the second is there's going to be a reflexive defensiveness on the part of the person who's being asked these difficult questions in the town hall. And no one likes to be embarrassed. And so what I found it has been better is approaching the person in private and starting the conversation with like, I really want to ask this in the town hall, but I didn't feel that was the right place. Can we have a discussion about this? And state your piece. Like, don't be accusatory. Don't be like, you screwed up and you're doing it wrong and you should feel bad. Instead be like, I'm really concerned about this issue. How do you feel we can address this issue? What would you like to see us do? Because when it all comes down to it, I think what people forget is that humans do our best when we're working as groups. Like, if there's enough cavemen, they can bring down a woolly mammoth. One person is going to have a much harder time bringing down a woolly mammoth. So now I generally don't raise a ruckus in town halls, and I try and ask the questions more subtly. And I mean, it might not work out. You still might not get the answers you're looking for, but you're gonna make the executives a little less angry. At Microsoft, I actually had a vice president like demanding to know who I was and what I thought I was doing, who my manager was, and I kind of escaped that one, but it woke me up a little bit, and I was like, okay, I'm not getting anywhere with this approach. What's a better approach I can take?
48 laws of power never outshine the master.
Uh, yeah, that's probably wise. But I was young and I was idealistic, and it took me until I had several mentors say, there's a time and a place for questioning, and then there's going to be a certain point where you're going to have to disagree and commit and get the job done. And like, if you just dig your heels in and be like, no, 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 eventually, you're going to be replaced because you still have to get the job done at the end of the day.
You disappear into the woods in Maine twice a year. Is that just rest, or does that help build the standards you have the rest of the year?
That's a great question. It's fascinating because it changes my context. Currently, I live in San Jose. Everything is very aimed at Silicon Valley and Silicon Valley employees. If you drive into downtown or you drive into San Francisco downtown, the billboards make no sense to about 99% of the population. It's all like, "Do you want to AI your sequel for B2B?" And when you go to Maine, it's a totally different viewpoint. It's like they there's less interest in the technology, there is more interest in actually being able to accomplish the task. So it's sort of like, I wanna be able to watch the football game. I don't wanna have to learn about like network topologies to optimize carrier throughput. I want it to work. And it's really good to be reminded of that. In Seattle, we would call it the Microsoft bubble, where you would just sort of assume that everyone had a kernel debugger and could, figure out figure out the problem. And you lose sight of the fact that no, not everyone can do that. And it can be it influenced how I test software in that I do a lot of persona-based testing where I say, I'm not the customer. The customer is Susan. She's a single mom. She's an attorney in New York City. She doesn't have time for this, and she needs to manage both emails about soccer practice and emails from her law firm. And it's like the approach that Susan is going to take to using the software is going to be different to the approach that I take to software, where it's like, yeah, I'm running my own mail server under my desk, or sure, I have 5 Linux machines and they're all talking to each other, because like I have to have that sense of user empathy if I want the user to have a positive experience.
Here's what I can't stop thinking about, and it's kind of the thesis of these conversations. AI is going to really change how the industry works over the next few years. And I think it's going to get rid of a lot of the friction you came up on and I came up on, specifically maybe those manual bug hunts. And we're talking about this on the day that Anthropic released, what's the model? Fable. But it's going to throw new kinds of friction at us. And you said AI code passes, but often it's black boxes, no logging. That's a new type of friction. And it's not any less of it, it's a different type. So is the real skill not handling any particular hard thing, but being the kind of person who can figure out these new black boxes and find their footing?
I
And
feel
if so, can that be taught, or do you just have to live through enough of it?
that's a really great take on it, and I think the answer is that's part of it. In terms of testing software using AI, I think the key is knowing what questions to ask it. You can't just be like, "Find bugs." That's that's really not gonna get you very far, but if you can approach it in a targeted direction, like similar how you would before AI, where I'd say, "Okay, I have different categories of testing I wanna do. I wanna do functional testing, I wanna do performance testing, I wanna do security testing," and ask questions related to that, to the AI. I think you'll get good results. The other thing that really terrifies me is what AI generated code is not good at, and it is very poor right now at generating code that is accessible, and by that I mean, screen readers, vision tools, auditory cues. It is extremely poor at that. Kelly Ford, formerly at Microsoft, has written some absolutely incredible articles about AI generated code missing accessibility features. And right now, as a result of that, if I'm, vibe coding any kind of project, one of the first things I do is I say, is this is this UI accessible? And almost always the answer's been no. It's been able to fix it, which is great. It has the tools to be able to fix it, but you have to know to ask the question. And I think in terms of understanding the black box, I don't know how to solve that problem. And I think we're even past almost past the point of no return there. For my favorite story about this was they were trying out an AI at a hospital to detect if a patient had a certain kind of disease based on a chest X-ray. And all of a sudden it started getting it right 100% of the time. And they were like, what's going on? And fortunately, they had some ability to gain insights into the model. What had turned out to be the culprit was AI realized that if it had the hospital watermark on the X-ray, it was probably a patient at the hospital, and it was probably bad enough that it had that disease, and so it just started looking for water, ignoring the entire X-ray, just focusing on the watermark, and everyone was like, "Wow, what a great AI!" So that does keep me up at night because it's sort of like if you don't have insight into how the LLM is thinking, you're going to end up with scenarios like that. And so a lot of my interactions with LLMs, I will ask it like, show the reasoning, show your confidence in the change. Like, what are some potential risks here? What is the unexpected impacts or interactions that this code might potentially have? And I think that mitigates it somewhat.
Here's where I landed, and it's not what I expected. Everything David got good at, the bugs and the hard conversations and being the guy that walks across the hall when nobody else did, he built by navigating friction. And I think the easy story is that AI removes friction, so we're all doomed. But I don't think I buy that anymore. The friction doesn't disappear. I think it moves. And the bugs you used to hunt by hand becomes knowing when the model's confidently wrong. And the skill was never handle this specific kind of hard thing. It was being someone who can figure out how to walk into a new hard thing and find their footing. So the people who have taste aren't the ones clinging to the old friction. They're the ones who got good at meeting new friction again and again. And that's the thing I want to keep exploring on this series. Thanks, David. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. Had a great conversation.